Kieran is a vet in Ireland, in a small town called Tipperary. We know it from the song. It's a long way to Tipperary, but I've never been there. So, and in fact, when I read it on his website of the practice, it's the oldest practice in Ireland already since 1904. So that's something. This is Kieran. I hope he will join us later on. That's where the practice is located. Like I said, I've never been there, but it must be a nice environment and a nice place to be a veterinarian in practice. So what is also a bit recognizable for us in Belgium is that the typical farm size is about 90 cows. We have it a little bit smaller on average, but also there, I presume they have the larger farms, like more than 250 cows is about circa 3% of the farms. They have also smaller farms, and the average farmer age is 44 years, which seems to me still okay, but because I don't know how it is in other countries, but farmers are getting older and it's difficult to find follow-up and young people who will go on farming, certainly in dairy. The thing in Ireland is, and what he told us, that there is a kind of let's say the way they work with spring calving. The cows calve in a specific season in spring, and about St. Patrick's Day for the Irish people, an important day. He said that's an important day for them, but also on farm, because then is the day that it should have happened. The climate is mildly and wet, and the average temperature in winter is 7 degrees. Rarely they have snow. So, okay, average summer temperature around 20 degrees, frequently raining, wet. So very interesting in relation to parasitic control. And they have winter housing. So cows are on farm, are in the stable from mid-November to mid-March. It's a bit like Belgium. And so they have a pasture season and a stable season. Also in other countries, sometimes very much different than that one. The strategies, typically parasiticide strategies, what farmers used to do, they deworm all young stock throughout the first grazing season. And that's the way they approach the pasture management. Also a bit like we knew it some years ago in practice, and I probably think it's still so in Belgium. All yearlings are wormed at turnout and possibly once during the grazing season, during the second grazing season. That's a bit different. Perhaps you could think in your countries how it is there, but we tend to do it sometimes differently, depending on the farmer and the vet and the location. Animals of all age are dewormed, and also against fluke at housing and at drying off. That's also sometimes different in other countries, also because of the different seasons and so on. All adult cows are treated for lungworms, May, June, or when they start coughing. Of course, clinical symptoms, that's a way to look at it. Also there you can discuss, here they say all adult cows, certainly in our country, is not always on every farm. It's not a basic protocol used. It's more like when it is a problem on these kind of farms. The challenger are for Kieran that as he told us, the intestinal roundworms, of course, the lungworm, the liver fluke, and the rumen fluke. And this is something perhaps later on Johannes can elaborate it a little bit, because rumen fluke, when I was a practitioner, and that's already more than 10 years ago, rumen fluke was an emerging thing. We knew it, but we didn't know that it could have devastating consequences. We didn't see clinical symptoms, and sometimes in the slaughterhouses you saw rumens full of rumen flukes, but afterwards you didn't see clinical symptoms and you didn't know what was the importance. So there's now more knowledge on that, I think. First of all, Kieran wanted to talk about rumen fluke. again, for him also, it's a game changer. And it was a bit like coccidiosis-like symptoms. I don't have that experience, but of course it is possible. And there was poor or no response to conventional treatments. And that's also a discussion point, I believe, in between practitioners. What can we do if we have identified the rumen fluke in the animals? Also, diagnostic-wise, I think it's a difficult one. We know it also only when we had in the slaughterhouse in the rumens, when we could identify the rumen fluke. Okay, that's what we talked about. Lab results initially considered as silicon finding. It's like I said, we didn't know, and perhaps we don't know it at this moment really clearly what it's about. The right treatment is difficult. Oxyclosanide becomes a routine part of protocol in Ireland. So that was a new problem for vets at that time. Then the lungworm is another story. Also there is a change in understanding of lifelong immunity, and that I can confirm because also in practice we saw sometimes on dairy farms when cows started coughing, and that was most of the time end of the summer season, end of August, beginning of September, cows started coughing, and then we noticed that not only the first pasture or the younger animals started coughing, but also cows that should have been already exposed to these parasites. So indeed, lifelong immunity also there. Perhaps Johannes can tell us more about it. Also about diagnostic, and I think there's something in it in the presentation on it later on. Okay, I will go on. Yeah, tricky and response to treatment. Fecal samples, Kieran says it's unreliable, and the bronchoalveolar lavage is at this time the best way to go. Indeed, what we used to do, and I go a little bit further, is the fecal examination, and we built upon that in practice years ago our diagnostic. And I don't know, the specificity, of course, is very high. Sensitivity will be a little bit lower, but again, it was our only way to find out. Now the bronchial lavage has arrived, and it's a technique that's fairly easy in the field. But we started using it more in relation to respiratory problems. And at one occasion, I experienced myself that in young animals, we could see indeed the worms being washed out of the lungs. And then you could show the farmer, here you have, like you see here on this picture, the dictiochorus in the fluid, which came out of the lungs. So this is really, it is there, so you have to do something. So, okay, diagnostic. This could be a pain point, how to do it. The technique is not that difficult. You just have to use the right tube, and the best way to keep a cow from swallowing the tube into the rumen is to take the tongue and never leave it go until you are in the stomach, in the lungs. So that's fairly a good way to go. So the treatment of choice for Kieran was ipromectin. They traditionally get a drying off treatment in December with ivermectin and albendazole also, depending on liver fluke burden, of course. And I think that's a bit at the end also the thing. There's no one solution that fits every farm. So you have to have the data and the most as possible the information of the farm. So then the liver fluke here, it seems that they submitted samples to the lab regularly 2 times for liver fluke. In 2008, 2010 they started. It isn't the case anymore today. And then I have to remind me what Kieran told about it. that they treated more targeted based on lab results, yes, and slaughter reports, and that's a bit the same in Belgium also. I don't know for other experiences, perhaps later on we can hear from you. But it is a difficult one, and also because there are not a lot of products available for vets and farmers to use in dairy cattle against liver fluke. So that's the big issue. That's for me as a whole practitioner is a big pain point in liver fluke treatment. So, and then they used treatment at the moment of drying off, but sometimes even then it is difficult with legislation and registration of medication. So he talks about the advice on this one, fecal testing and the winter treatment plan. They talk about fecal egg counts. And of course, in 30% of the clients, he says it is necessary and you find positive diagnostics, so you can show to the farmer, because that's then again a way to tell them and to have it in the communication to convince them you have to do something, because there is indeed a parasite burden in the farm, in the animals. So at the end, indeed, the customer needs to see the value of what you are doing, and that's something difficult sometimes. The communication from vet to farmer is always the most difficult part in these things. The winter worming plan, according to Kieran, was they had a report each November, December based on weather and the forecasts that are made, and also Johannes knows a lot on that one. I know for sure forecasts on worm infection, on pasture, and so on. And then they say, okay, separate plan for each age group. Again, because withdrawal times, that's what I just mentioned, it is a difficult one. There Kieran is. Hi,
yeah,
Kieran.
I was just telling you, Joe, so he's here.
Okay, just interrupt me. And Kieran, I was starting to talk about your presentation. You're on mute. Yes.
Hey everybody, I'm so sorry.
No worries, no worries. Would you like to share your screen, or do I?
I can share my screen.
Okay.
I'm good to go, Yo, yeah?
Yeah, please
okay.
do.
Okay, so just a technical thing here. I cannot screen share. I think you're sharing already, Yo.
Yeah, but I would like to stop sharing, and
Okay.
Yeah, okay, stop sharing, now you're on.
Great. And apologies to everybody. I think I've had a mix up with European Central Time and Irish time.
Okay.
So anyway, I'll begin. First of all, thank you, Yo, for inviting, and thanks to Boehringer Ingelheim for inviting me to speak today. I'm delighted to be here. It's great. As you know, I listened to Johannes yesterday, and he also mentioned how it's great to see a pharmaceutical company like Boehringer Ingelheim, supporting an initiative such as this. So, a brief history about me. My name is Kieran O'Mahony. I own and work in Glen Veterinary, which is in Tipperary, in the southern half of Ireland. So here we go. We are kind of mid-south, you could say. We're in Tipperary town. It's an area of Ireland known as the Golden Vale. So it is considered a quite rich farmland, a good dairy country. Like I would presume most of Europe and a lot of the world, we have seen herd sizes expand, particularly since 2015, when the milk quota was abolished. And if you were to look at dairy cow numbers in the country as a whole, in 2000, between the year 2000 and 2015, very little change. There was about 1.1 million dairy cows in Ireland. Now in 2020, the last time it was counted in 2020, we've 1.55 million. So there's quite a lot of expansion going on. The climate in Ireland, oh, sorry, this is the Glen. This is the Glen from which my practice gets its name, the Glen of Aherlow. There's a national park here. And as you can see, you know, and this is very reflective of the countryside I work in. A lot of the land is quite marginal, so fit for probably very little else except forestry. So as you climb towards the hills there, you can see a lot of trees. But dotted in amongst them, you can see fields, and these are the type of farms that I would visit. So if you were to go south of here or east of where we are, you would see a lot more open, wide, rolling grassland. Whereas in our area, it's more like this, traditional farms, relatively small holdings compared to other parts of the country. So a typical farm here is about 90 cows. That's kind of the average. And, you know, I talk about expansion. Those farms 5 years ago would have had 70 cows, and they've expanded to a certain extent. About 3% of our dairy clients have 250 cows or more. So this is relatively low in comparison to other parts of the country. And in particular, I'd be talking about Cork, which is the real southern tip of Ireland, even North Tipperary. So just if you were to travel 20 kilometers north or east of us, you would have far drier, better draining land, and the farms tend to be bigger with more cows. And our farmer average age is about 44 years. So just like the rest of Ireland, we have a spring calving pattern. So the calving season, the bulk of the cows, the target is that 90% of cows are calved between the 1st of February and the middle of March. It so happens that 17th of March is our national holiday, St. Patrick's Day. So St. Patrick's Day is very much a landmark date on the farming calendar, be it talking about cows calved or cattle out at pasture as well. We would consider it a particularly wet winter, spring, if our cattle couldn't go out by Patrick's Day. And that's kind of a landmark we use. The climate in general is mild and wet. For such a small country, actually, Ireland has quite a diverse climate. So if you were to go across at the widest part of Ireland, it's only 200 kilometers, but the east of the country gets 30% less rain than the west of the country, because the west of the country obviously is on the Atlantic. So there's quite a considerable difference between east and west. We're somewhere in the middle, and we kind of can get either or depending on which way the wind is blowing. But average winter temperatures in Ireland are generally, you know, low positive. So 7 degrees Celsius is actually the average. Generally, it tends to be quite wet, and it rarely snows. Snow is a big event in this country. If it snows, it generally makes the national news. So we rarely see snow. Our average summer temperature then, 19, 20 degrees, quite temperate, and frequent rain. So at the moment, we're going through a particularly good spell. It's been quite dry for the last 2 weeks, but that is probably a bit unusual in itself. Winter housing then, it goes generally from mid-November to mid-March, and it can vary quite a bit. It varies quite a bit depending on which part of the country you're in, and it also depends on the type of winter we're getting. So, and really rainfall is the determining factor, and underground conditions, underfoot conditions. If land is wet, obviously cattle either have to come in or stay in if you're talking about the springtime. Again, down the southern part of the country, land is very, it's limestone based, it's very well drained, and cattle would stay out a lot longer into the winter, and they would be out very early in the spring in comparison to us here in Tipperary. So in Cork, cattle, it would be considered a bad winter if the cattle weren't out kind of by early February. So to move on then to parasites and what we see as vets in practice, you know, it's kind of the traditional, the typical process in this country would be that all young stock are wormed throughout their first grazing season. So these are young calves, generally put out to pasture probably a little bit later than the other cattle, so probably April. We'd be kind of aiming for the 1st of April. Again, if it's a good spring, maybe Patrick's Day. They go out a little bit later, and those calves then are routinely given a worm treatment of some description, be it a drench, an injection, or a pour-on, according to the recommended time scale. So a drench every 3 weeks, injection or pour-on 5, 8 or longer weeks, depending on the product being used. And nearly all farmers will stick religiously to that ethos. All yearlings then, so these are cattle that have they're in their second season of grazing. They are wormed at turnout typically, and possibly once during the second grazing season. Sometimes not, and sometimes if it's particularly wet, or if there's if the farmer feels there are issues there, he might go with a second one. But usually one treatment at grazing is usually what they would get. And then as we go to the winter, at housing, or in the case of dairy cows, when they're being dried off, all animals tend to get, again, this is typical, all animals would tend to get a worm dose and a fluke dose. And this is done across the board, has been done for generations. This is just what people do. And then just a little addendum then at the end, I think kind of generally speaking, since 2014-15, we have seen massive increases in the clinical signs associated with lungworm in adult dairy cows. And as a result, these dairy cows are now being treated pretty routinely in May or June, or else when they start coughing in the summertime. And I'll touch on that again later in my presentation.
Kieran, just a word,
Yes.
because I am the timekeeper, unfortunately, to leave enough room for discussion. We should finish in about 5 to maximum 10 minutes. Okay. Are you comfortable with that? Okay.
That's fine, Marita, no problem.
Perfect.
Okay, so quickly run through, you know, the same, these have been discussed before, the challenges we face as vets. Rumen fluke, I describe rumen fluke as a game changer. Why do I say that? It's because it changed the way we as vets and our farmer clients thought about parasite treatments. And I don't think that's an exaggeration to say. We had a particularly wet summer in 2008 and again in 2009. And what we were seeing were cattle really doing badly, showing a poor thrive. Some of them were even dying. Farmers thought, and as vets, we were wondering as well, they were getting fluke treatments to no avail. They were being treated for coccidiosis, which is something we see quite a lot of. And there was very little response to this. We were submitting samples to the lab. They were pretty non-satisfactory. But as time went on, we started to see more lab results showing up positives for rumen fluke eggs. And even the labs themselves were kind of saying, look, this is a normal commensal in the rumen. It's not usually of any pathological significance. And there was a bit of confusion around it. But slowly but surely, we realized that we need to treat for this. And I was speaking to local butchers at the time, and they were saying, oh yeah, we see these in the stomach all the time. This is normal. But no, it wasn't. The burden was too high. And we discovered oxyclosinide, a worm treatment that had been, or a fluke treatment that had been consigned to history really, was the magic bullet here. And we treated these animals and the results were remarkable. But they were so remarkable that it suddenly became a silver bullet for everything. And suddenly farmers wanted to use oxyclosinide routinely. So in the following years, we discovered that even though it wasn't necessary, farmers were using this product at very high rates. And this led to fears for resistance. So I felt this was a big challenge for us to educate our farmers and tell them, look, you need to ease off on this. We don't have an alternative. We cannot afford resistance to build up to this. Lungworm was the other game changer in my business, I feel. It forced us to kind of re-educate ourselves. I think our understanding of lifelong immunity changed as a result of the effects of lungworm that we've seen in adult dairy cows in the last 7 or 8 years. I think myself it's due to expansion. I think more cows are grazing the same amount of land, so they're grazing tighter. And the burdens seem to be getting higher and higher. Again, Johannes referred to this yesterday. He said, you know, it's really what's happening is they're being treated in a response to coughing, and we probably should be doing better. And I mean, I think that conversation has to be had. I think we've gone along. It's relatively recently, since 2014. So we need to look at alternatives instead of just treating all the time. We need to find ways of preventing this as being such a problem in adult dairy cows. Diagnosis of lungworm is tricky. So it meant we had to learn another skill, bronchoalveolar lavage, certainly a new skill for me. But I felt, you know, farmers love visual evidence, and here was visual evidence. We went through the process. Just briefly, here's a couple of photographs, and this is what you show the farmer. Larvae in a syringe, they can see it with their own eyes, and that's the key. There's no microscope involved. Here you go, cow-side diagnosis, and that's a real winner when it comes to convincing farmers. So as I said, treatment of choice of prunomectin, and then also our cows traditionally get a worm treatment at drying off as well, and also a liver fluke treatment. Liver fluke, I think, again, and I'm referring to Johannes' excellent presentation yesterday, you know, the thinking on liver fluke has changed. What was considered acceptable 10, 20, 30 years ago, today it's not. Now if we find a liver fluke egg, we treat. One egg is one too many. Here we have, in the last number of years, we have slaughter reports from the meat factories, and they provide another visual for the farmer to see where his liver fluke status is in terms of flukes. But livers were regularly condemned in slaughterhouses 10, 15 years ago. Not so today. The results are much better. Is this good control, or is it over treatment? That's an argument that should probably be had as well. But we'd like to think that our treatment now is more targeted on a number for a number of reasons. Lab results, we look at different factors, and again, Johannes referred to this yesterday. Rather than just taking one diagnosis, you know, look at a few different options and size it up based on a few different criteria. My pitch always to farmers is, it's a big job if you're going drenching your cows. Make sure that A, you're using the right product. Make sure you need to use a product. They may not need to drench their cows at all. And C, make sure you do it at the right time. Timing is vital as well. And that's where we as vets come in. We can offer that advice. So to briefly go through in our place then, where we target this parasite treatment, I think our approach revolves around advice, around fecal testing, and we provide a winter treatment plan for our customers every winter, and that varies from winter to winter. So we have an in-house laboratory. Because of COVID, I felt 2020 was a kind of an unusual year. So I went back to 2019, just did a brief count. We did 61 egg counts for 61 different farmers. It's about roughly 30% of our client base. It's obviously an income generator for the practice, but it also puts us front and center. It binds us to our farmers, and we can offer advice then based on those fecal egg counts. And there's nothing better than telling a farmer that, you know what, you don't need to use the expensive stuff. You can use the the cheaper stuff, the less powerful stuff, it'll do your job, the job you need. Or look, you have a low burden of rumen fluke. Okay, you might have 9 or 10 cows that are doing a little less well than the others, and apply the refugia model there, treat those, but the rest of the cows are doing just fine without a treatment. Our winter worming plan, this came about as an aid for staff, really. We have 8 vets, and I just wanted to make sure that each vet was giving the same information. So based on the weather we have had throughout the year, based on the timing of housing, and also on fluke forecasts issued by our Department of Agriculture here in Ireland, I put together a worm and fluke treatment plan for different age groups and depending on the time of housing. And so each farmer, it was kind of a template that each farmer could apply his own specific circumstances to. And it almost accidentally, it became a favorite with farmers. Farmers were picking this up, they were looking at it, and we were able to modify it to their specific plan then. And farmers really liked that. It was there in, again, it's another visual. It's there in black and white, and they can plan around it. And I would say that almost every time you save your customer money and time. Sometimes they might be drenching cows unnecessarily, or they might be drenching cows with the wrong product or too strong a product. We have huge issues here with farmers reaching for triclobendazole every time. We try to discourage that if we can. So, you know, the new EU directive then, so in Ireland, and I think throughout the EU, from the 28th of January on, all anthelmintics are going to become prescription only. So as vets, again, we're going to have to adapt to that, and we're going to put, I think we have a great opportunity here to put ourselves front and center, because we can offer the advice, we can offer the science, and we can point our farmers in the right direction. And there's advice, testing, and farmer education. That's where I see the future for the vet. This obviously would promote. Number one in my list would be promoting responsible usage of products, and then hopefully then we'll help reduce the resistance issue, or certainly help with the resistance issue. You know, I think farmers, if they go into my local merchant here, they walk up to a counter and they can buy whatever they want. And if they ask the guy behind the counter, what should they get? He's not really trained to know. And they'll probably reach for the red box or the blue box or the brown box, because that's what they've always used. And sure, listen, they've got on fine, it's grand. But I like to think when they come into me, I might stop them buying a particular box, and they can see the value in that. And that's it. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Kieran, for this clear and interesting presentation. It is, like I said at the beginning, it is a bit like we also saw in practice. There are resemblances. I would like to know now from the other people in the room, what for them is, what are their experiences, and does someone has some remarks and discussion points. For me, again, first thing is that the communication vet to farmer becomes always really important, and diagnostic, and to make it possible, like you said, to show him what is happening is really important. But I don't know what the other others think about it.
And maybe we can stop sharing the presentation and everybody put their camera on so we can see each other while discussing. I think that would be nice for everybody to see who's talking at the moment.
Stop share. There we go.
Wonderful.
And just to let you know, you have about 20 minutes to discuss, so minutes, yeah. Don't be shy.
Let yourself go. Who has his thoughts? Similar or different, whatever. How is this like for instance in Japan or in other countries? We have people from all over the world.
Okay, may I?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. I'm Junjie Zhang from China. I'm right now working for Boehringer Ingelheim ruminant team here, in charge of the technical service part. Oh, I think from the experience in China is totally different. I think the main reason is our industry, dairy farming industry system is totally different with the situation in Ireland or in most of the country in Europe. I think almost more than 90% of the commercial dairy farm here is intensity system. We don't have any pasture, so all the animal was putting in a small area, and we just have a housing barn and milking parlor to running the system. So it's very rare to see or to there also no research about what's the problem of nematode or other intestinal parasites, but some farms are facing the problem with the external parasite, the mange or maybe others. But I think that's the situation here. So basically, most of the dairy farms they are not they didn't have a good awareness of parasite control here.
Okay. The zero grazing thing also in some other countries, also in Belgium, some regions.
Yeah.
Some other remarks from other people on that one. Johannes, what do you think about zero grazing farms and parasite burden? Is it possible, or I presume some animals go out, some don't?
Yes, I can, but I will answer very shortly, because I think maybe it's useful that everybody just we go one by one now to everybody's opinion and thoughts on the talk we just heard. But zero grazing, yeah, well, yes, normally you will not have parasite problems, at least for the nematodes and the liver fluke, etc., as we hear. Of course, there can be exceptional cases where the fresh grass is fed, etc., or where from hay eventually, but this is very, very exceptional. But of course, you can have other parasites, for instance, like the Coccidia, Giardia, Cryptosporidium, that also can be very important in house systems, and also the ectoparasites, as Joey mentioned.
Yes. Care about for the very young calves about coccidosis and crystal. What's that word? Sorry.
Crypto.
Yes, but yeah, crypto. But they are only on the very young calves, so they make some hygiene plan to remove as much as the manure to keep the environment for the hunts for the calves or the group pen to be very clean, and to change the bedding regularly. And also we have some products for the anti-coccidosis. Yes, to some farms will have some kind of blend treatment at the when they group the calves together, and for other farms they just treat the calves if they see some diarrhea or especially with some bloody diarrhea, they will think about coccidosis. Yeah.
Okay.
But I think for these two kind of parasite, most of the things they do here is to keep away from the manure for the calves.
Hygiene.
Yeah.
Someone else? What I was asking myself also in other countries, the importance, how is the importance of rumen flu perceived? Like for instance, Khaled in South Africa. I believe that's the country where you come from. To add something on that, Annette?
I can add something on this, because in Germany we also thought it's not a problem at all, but the last years it's growing and growing. Maybe because the universities are looking to also have clinical science with ruminant flukes in Germany.
The same in Belgium, but you mentioned it already. We knew we had it, but we definitely saw it more and more in the diagnosis during the fecal samples. And now also sometimes we can see some clinical problems, but I think it's still not a major issue, but we definitely see it has become very much more common than in the past.
I want to ask about non-organized farm. Most of one of main problem facing, I'm Egyptian, I'm living case in Saudi Arabia, but I'm Egyptian. So one of the most important problem we have liver fluke. But most of farm not organized like the model we saw. Every farmer has 5, 6, 8 number of cows. So he has a regime for control liver fluke. Just he noticed if the symptoms are appear, he start to treat. Otherwise, he hasn't regular plan for this, or didn't take any decision for treatment, except if he sees the symptoms. So also we're facing another problem. We have many products for resist liver fluke, like oxyclosanide, like colizintal, even injection like cholesterol. But we can say they didn't find the magic treatment for this problem, or the one way or the ideal way for this. If you can comment or give us advice about this point.
I think this is a pain point.
I think it's a very difficult question, and I think it would be useful to, let's say, I don't fully understand the question, so I would suggest maybe to try to write it in some kind of way, so we can maybe come back to it afterwards. I don't know.
Yeah, but I think it's about treatment liver fluke, if I understand well, Khaled. It's about treatment, how to. Yeah.
The plan of treatment plan.
Treatment plan for liver fluke. Yeah.
For non-organized farm.
For not organized farms.
Yes.
So with no protocols, no standard operating procedures, and so on and so on. So
yes.
So how can you? And again, I think communication plays a big role.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Most of farmers didn't use the lab for detection if. Liver fluke is already present or not, already take any, except by his eyes.
Yeah.
To start treatment. So the problem, it was very clear in the whole organization.
Yeah. So I think that's what in the early days it was like that. We saw symptoms and we treated, but I think. I don't know what everyone else's opinion is then in relation to liver fluke, you're too late. So you have to convince the farmers to do diagnostics. That's in fact the pain point. But how to do that one? And then which diagnostic in relation to liver fluke, it's always a discussion again also amongst practitioners. Antibodies, is this an option?
From a practitioner's point of view, my understanding is that the antibodies can be historical. Would that be correct to say?
I think so, yeah. I think so. And I don't know how long antibodies stay present after infection, because that's something interesting to know.
Well, I don't know if I can say something, but
Of course.
yes, of course, antibodies reflect exposure and past exposure, and they can stay long. You will see a drop. Let's say if you treat an effective treatment, you have removed the flukes, your antibody levels will start to drop quite quickly. Maybe even after 2 weeks or 1 month, you will see a difference, but still they will often test positive. Mm-hmm. So before it turns negative can be very long, can be 6 months or longer. And in that time, they will mostly already have done a reinfection or something. So that,
yeah. We have still 5 minutes, and something we didn't touch, I think, is the resistance and relation to resistance. Yeah, perhaps Kieran talked about resistance, of course, but how deal with it in dairies, the targeted and the targeted selected treatment. Is this something? How can we deal with that? Are farmers already open for that? Are vets ready? Someone an idea?
I think farmers are very slow to change their habits. I think it always surprises me how they'll just as quickly reach for a bottle and treat their calves rather than collect 5 dung samples and drop them somewhere to be analyzed. It seems to be they get an hour and, oh, listen, I'm going to treat my calves now. So it is. I am seeing a change in the younger farmers, but it's slow, and the numbers are small.
I think it's also difficult to convince them to do something where they do not see immediately the effect or the gain, and that is in fact TTS.
Yeah. The other thing is they know there are a burden also in good-looking animals, and they would like to treat all of them, not to only 90% of the animals. So that's also a discussion, because in the past they always treat all animals. So to change the thinking is not so easy.
I think so. Yeah. Some other interesting thoughts on the presentation, on the way it went in Ireland, besides the nice environment there.
I had a question, maybe, but it can be for definitely to Kieran, but also to everybody. Like, if we do fecal testing, for instance, like when do we take the samples, and how many samples are we taking? Is it one animal, or can we convince the farmer to test more animals, or is that too costly, etc.?
We encourage as often as possible, Johannes, and we generally would encourage 5 to 10 individual animals, but we do tend to pool the samples. Now, scientifically that might not be ideal, but we feel in order to keep costs down, and also combined with other things like weight gain or weight loss, weather patterns, time of year, I think it's another element to it to help. I wouldn't, rather than just basing it on one parameter.
And does this kind of testing help you to, let's say, postpone a treatment, or yes?
Yeah, absolutely. So at this time of the year, the worm burdens in young calves, for instance, can be quite low. So if we find 50 eggs per gram, we will say, wait. And we find as the summer goes on and into later summer, the burdens tend to rise then. And we can show this again, and it's there for the farmer to see. So then we can go ahead. One complicating factor we have is that we have a number of other things causing weight loss in calves. In particular, we have what we call a summer scour syndrome, the cause of which is debated and largely unknown. And this tends to lead to calves getting a worm dose because they are losing condition, and they may not need a worm dose, but they get one anyway.
Is this in older pasture calves then, this summer syndrome? Yeah.
It is, and it's something we have seen for the last 10 years or so. And calves at turnout or shortly after turnout develop a diarrhea, they weight loss, they lose appetite, and they get pyrexic, they run a temperature.
Yeah.
And the only treatment, if you want to call it that, is to remove them from grass. So the grass is making them sick. Yeah.
It sounds a bit to me like pasture coccidiosis, maybe, but
and it is, and the symptoms are very similar. But these calves get loads of coccidiosis treatments, again, rightly or wrongly, and to no avail.
Yeah, interesting. Interesting. Marita, it is 15:15, I see.
Yeah, I wanted to ask if anybody else has a question, a pressing question or a comment they want to pose now. Otherwise, you can think about it. I posed 3 questions in the chat. We touched base on some of them, but maybe before you jump out of this meeting, take 2 or 3 minutes to answer them in the chat if you have further comments to add what we didn't touch base on. And then you can join the virtual venue for 15 minutes, or you can go to the plenary session. There will be a break until 15:30, and then you will rejoin the plenary session. But I will give you an opportunity to speak up if you haven't been able to yet. If not, I think Joe and Johannes will appreciate if you could answer the questions in the chat. If you have further ideas that we haven't touched base on, just post them in the chat and I will capture it. And then, I don't know, any famous last words from you, Johannes or Joe?
But I'd like to stress what you said. Please do leave comments in the chat box, like answering those questions, but also maybe other questions that you still have or you would like more information on, because the idea is that, yes, we use this information also for a smaller report and maybe also to further think on those questions and how we can do something with that and provide you with information.
Sorry, but what's the TST short for the second question? Sorry.
That's for targeted selective treatment. It means selecting the individual animals within a group. So you're not giving all the animals a dose, but only certain animals that you select on certain criteria.
Okay, clear. Thank you.
Okay, I think everybody's chatting away, so that's really good. Feel free to close your camera if you start chatting and then just jump out of the meeting once you're done. Yeah, and thank you from my side. It was really interesting to listen to all of you discussing. And yeah, remember, 5:30, be back in the plenary session.
Thank you all very much for the discussion and the interactive participation, and hope to see you later in the autopsy room, I think.
Thank you.